Episode 77, live today on People I Know show. Curt Carstensen joined by Dr. Tom Moorcroft in Connecticut. Hello, good afternoon, Dr. Tom.
Hey, how's it going, Curt?
I'm doing quite well. It's a lovely day here. It seems like a great day to get outside and enjoy a nice walk through a trail or something. I know I did a preview for this episode today, doing that yesterday. And something like that happened a couple years ago that caused some issues for me involving Lyme disease. And I want to tell you and the audience my story, but I've invited you on today. I met you a few months ago. We had some good conversations, and I learned that you were a bit of an expert on Lyme disease and have a background personally with it yourself. So share a little bit about both your background in medicine, but also your background with Lyme disease.
Yeah, I've sort of been in medicine since 1995, and in one form or another, doing wilderness medicine, EMT stuff, and then worked in the ER, and then after that, went to medical school, and somewhere along the way, actually, I think it was right around 1997, I had contracted acute Lyme disease, really sick, had a lot of terrible fatigue, brain fog. I really couldn't think. This was back in the day when we had the rotary phone, and I was actually on the phone with somebody, and they said, "Hey, I'd called them, and there was no caller ID." So they're like, "Well, I want to call and check on you. What's your phone number?" And well, I said, I have no idea. And then they're like, "Well, dude, you're on the phone, aren't you? It's like right in front of you." And I literally couldn't understand the fact that my phone number was on the phone in front of me. I mean, it was that bad. And then I ended up with this rash that covered like a fifth of my body. And so I got treated for about 10 days. And the first 4 days were kind of brutal. But then afterwards, it got a lot better. But then slowly over the next, couple of years, I started having brain fog and fatigue creep back in. I started, having aches and pains everywhere. Then my muscles started to ache. And I, along the way, got diagnosed with multiple different psychiatric illnesses, and then the medicines didn't work. And then they said, "Oh, well, it's fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue." And so, I was kind of stuck with that diagnosis until I sort of, stumbled upon lifestyle modifications and dietary stuff on my own. And I started to get a bit better. And then eventually I ran into two physicians in Maine who I was studying in their office while I was in medical school, and like all their patients they had the same exact symptoms like I did. And I just said, "Wait, whatever these people have, I'm pretty sure I have it. Could you test and check it out?" And a couple of weeks later, I got testing back that showed I had Lyme disease and babesiosis. And this is 8 years after those 10 days of doxycycline.
Wow.
And over the course of the next 4 years, I got treated, and all my symptoms went away. My brain came back. My body feels amazing. Anybody who knows me is like, I'm super athletic. I'm always outside or doing something or in the gym. And, it's just a matter of balancing out the diet and the exercise and, relaxation, along with, just kind of making sure you get the right treatments when you need to.
As people are joining us live here, I want to make sure that you make a comment, like, or share, or whatever it is, get more people watching this, because this is a very important piece of information here. So, Dr. Tom, I'm curious, was it because of the times and people, just doctors that know that much about what you had going on, or were you unlucky to just kind of be in the wrong place where no one could really help you at that time? Or is this what's happening today with people as well?
Curt, that's an awesome question, because I'm always giving everybody the benefit of the doubt. And I think at the time, the doctor I saw thought he was doing everything right. That's the information that was out there. But it was interesting. I worked at a place called the Institute of Ecosystem Studies, which, Gene Likens, the guy who discovered acid rain, actually started this. And subsequently, they renamed it to the Carey Institute. And they're doing a lot of sort of all the research on ticks and mice and the landscape ecology around this now. But they also have a beautiful garden system. And they had all these people who were doing the gardening across this beautiful sort of like, they had an indoor greenhouse and there's beautiful gardens across this huge outside property. But all these people in their 30s, they had like 5, 10, even 15 different episodes of Lyme disease, and they're all like super decrepit. They all have like early arthritis symptoms, and they're having a hard time moving. And I was like, it didn't make any sense. And in the long run, it turns out that I got Lyme disease about 20 minutes away from Dr. Richard Horowitz, who subsequently became one of my mentors and teachers in learning about persistent Lyme disease and the treatment. And I'm just like, I wish we had all just gone to his office rather than the regular doctor's office, because maybe we would have had a different outcome. But what we're really seeing these days is there's a growing awareness that Lyme disease is much more common than we used to think it was. I mean, even about 5, 6 years ago, the CDC said our estimates are probably about tenfold too low. So meaning when they say there's about 30,000 cases per year, it's probably more like there's 300,000 new cases of Lyme. And so more and more people are becoming aware. There's more studies that are being done showing that shorter courses of antibiotics are not really all that effective. And so the awareness is growing, but there's not enough of it yet. So we're still, I think so many people still have that same story like I did. Here's your 10 days, here's your 14 days, or maybe your 3 weeks if you're lucky. And then in 2 months, when you come back in with acute onset fibromyalgia, sort of the next thing you know is it's all in your head. It's not Lyme disease. It's not possible because you got your 3 weeks. So unfortunately, we still hear a lot of that.
My story might be a little different. I'm hoping it's on the better side of everything, but I want you, as someone who truly understands this, to help explain where I'm at right now. So 2 years ago, it'll be 2 years in June. I went home, I think the week before Father's Day, spent some time outside with my mom and my dad. We went on a bike ride. I came home, and on the farm, although they don't really farm anymore, he still has some farm stuff. He had some big old hay bales covered by a tarp. And my dad asked me to go fix the tarp, which had like blown over. And I drove the side-by-side 4-wheeler ATV out there. Was pretty careful to not walk through the tall grass, but obviously I made some contact with it. And I think I was wearing shorts, just kind of oblivious mostly to my risk. I climbed up on the bales, I fixed the tarp, got back down, went about my day. Somewhere in there, I assume, is when I got a tick on me, at least one, who knows?
Right.
And I didn't make a point to check myself to make sure there were no ticks. A few days later, only after the fact did I think about or remember that it seemed like one night in bed, I found something on me and I didn't really think much about it. And then one day in the shower, I saw something drop that looked unusual. That might have been a tick. I don't know. Right. But about a week after that, about 10 days after that weekend, I had this really minor headache that stayed. I'd never had a headache stay for like 4 days. But by about the 4th day, I thought I was getting a fever, but then I didn't feel like I had a fever. I was going up and down. And then by the weekend, I had what I've later heard is called brain fog, or nothing. Yeah. I couldn't concentrate on anything. My memory, like I'd go for a very simple memory, like normal, and it just wasn't there. I couldn't get it. And eventually I went into urgent care, but I went in not even thinking about Lyme disease. They were asking me questions about if I saw any spots on my body. I guess I hadn't looked that closely, because the next morning after my shower, after a terrible night, not being able to sleep well, I noticed a big old bullseye in my back and different spots elsewhere.
Oh, wow.
And went back into urgent care. So the thing is, I never actually got officially diagnosed with a test, because I was leaving town and they put me on I think it was doxycycline, a couple of weeks, and I immediately started to feel better. The spot went away within a matter of days. It was kind of crazy because it was so big, and then it was suddenly.
Yeah.
So exactly. So based on my story, Dr. Tom, is there any doubt that I had Lyme disease, and am I actually cured? Because I've told people I'm cured of it, but maybe that's not true.
Well, Curt, the thing with the bullseye rash, or what's more properly called an erythema migrans rash, we see that with the rash, not everybody gets a bullseye, but the rash it's sort of like a red splotch and stuff. That's consistent with the Lyme rash. And unless you're living in somewhere like Hawaii, or maybe north, very, very north in Alaska, that is what we call pathognomonic for Lyme disease, meaning that seals the diagnosis. You don't need to go and get blood tests and anything. You really should start the treatment early. And what happens is the earlier the treatment, the more likely you are to have a good outcome. And so, which is, I think, super important, because all the studies we have show that once you're about 4 months out from infection to the part where you start treatment, it's really hard to cure. We don't really know what does it. But when you get it right away, when that rash first comes out and you take definitive action and get that taken care of, you have a really good possibility that a shorter course of treatment will work, and that also, that you may have a long-term cure. Now, the other thing is, we know from some research out of Johns Hopkins that, I guess if we back up for a second, if you look at Lyme disease overall, people are talking about persister forms and stationary forms and even these biofilms and cysts, these things that are around for a period, that make Lyme stick around in your body longer. So basically all of these are protective mechanisms when the Lyme spirochete, the bacteria that causes most of the symptoms, is trying to attack you. If we go after it with our immune system or with antibiotics or herbs, we actually it'll go into this dormant protected state for when the environment in you is better. We know that early on that doesn't happen as much. So the earlier the treatment, the better. But the research out of Hopkins has also shown that these forms may be able to actually live that way in the tick. And it's possible that the tick can actually, essentially infect you with a persistent form of Lyme right away. Now, this is relatively new information, but clinically it makes sense. We see that 70 or 80% of people who get treated early on and they get their 3 or 4 weeks, like right out of the get-go, like you did, those people are 70 to 80% of them are going to do really well. But there's a small group of them that end up getting these persistent symptoms. And so those people may have been sort of infected with what they're calling early, late persistent Lyme disease, rather than the way we would usually think of getting it is you got bit, your symptoms slowly crept up. And then by the time you actually get a diagnosis, it's been 4 or 6 months after the tick bite. So there certainly is hope that, in your scenario, that it is cured. And, we think we can cure it at any stage. It's just the longer it's been, the harder it gets,
And I do have some other personal stories from my life. I had an uncle a month after me 2 years ago. I ended up on a phone call with him, and he was telling me like the exact same symptoms, but I haven't talked to him lately about it. I haven't heard any additional long-lasting symptoms from him. And I guess my grandma, I heard yesterday when I was telling people about this, telling my mom about this, my grandma had it last year, apparently, but also no long-term symptoms. But going back to your story, you got it treated. So you were one of the 30% that is more of an outlier then, or did something else go on that I missed?
Well, I mean, the thing is, we don't know, because our diagnostic tests don't let us know like exactly what you were infected with. And I was at the time, we were in Dutchess County, New York, which was one of the hotbeds for Lyme. And we do know that there is sort of like location variability, right? So, I mean, there's going to be different strains of Lyme disease in different locales. And one of the other things, though, that kind of went against me getting completely better is no one tested me for other tick-borne co-infections. And when I was having the first 4 days of the doxycycline treatment, it was July, I was laid out on the floor in my parents' basement. And it was crazy because I remember being like alternating sweats and chills. I was in so much pain that and I was in my early 20s. I needed someone to help me to the bathroom. That's how much pain I was in for 4 days. And then it was better. But subsequently, looking back, I had acute babesiosis that probably was at that time too. And so a lot of times when you have a co-infection or more than one infection coming from that tick bite, it's harder to diagnose because the symptoms look a little more funky, and it's also a little bit harder to treat. So it is possible that the reason I had such an issue was just because I maybe I needed 3 weeks instead of 10 days, or maybe had to have that babesiosis also treated at that time in order to completely cure it early on. And so then that just led to, to long-term symptoms.
I'm going to step back here because I realize 2 years ago, I was somewhat oblivious to how I might get Lyme disease. And I have a question in here, and I want to add to this as well. Cody asks, can you get Lyme from mice? And as I understand it, and explain to me how I'm wrong, where I'm wrong, if I am, that the ticks get the disease from deer or some other animal, and then they have it, and then they get on a human and give it to us. So how is it transferred, and how do we best then avoid it?
Yeah, Cody, awesome question. So the what we're seeing is that with the primary way that human beings get Lyme disease is from the bite from an infected deer tick. There really are no other animal vectors that we're aware of. There's and really like 99.9% of the transmission that we are aware of is coming through that modality. Now, where the mice and the chipmunks and the deer come in is sort of being they're harboring these infections, right? So what has to happen is the ticks are born in the larval form. They feed usually on mice. They get the infection from the mice, and then they molt and they become nymphs. And the deer tick nymph is essentially the size of a poppy seed. So they're really small and they're kind of like no-see-ums. So what we're finding is that about 95% of people are getting Lyme disease from this nymph, and presumably because it's just so small. About 5% are getting it from a bite of the adult female. So and that's the deer tick. And so what we know is the mice and even chipmunks are really important in harboring the Lyme disease spirochete, so that the ticks can get infected. Because with Lyme, they're essentially, the tick is born sterile. They feed on an infected mouse. They get infected. Then they feed on us and infect us. Now, where the deer come in, the deer can be infected with Lyme. And often we've seen deer, the areas where deer are is where we see a lot of deer ticks and we see a lot of Lyme disease. But what's really interesting is there's some research out of the University of Binghamton that had happened, a couple of years ago. They started working on this, where they were finding that the ticks that were on the deer had a very low level of Lyme disease infection, but in the same plots, the ticks that were on the mice had a much higher level of infection. And so that was kind of new, because usually people are saying, hey, the deer are a big player here. But when you step back and you look at it and you go, hey, why are deer and mice and chipmunks, so related to what these ticks are, that give us Lyme disease are about? And what we see is that they all live right along the edge, right? So they're, and in landscape ecology terms, the edge is right where what it sounds like, the connection between your yard and the woods. And so what we're seeing is that we have about 10 feet into the woods and 10 feet out into your yard. That strip is called the edge. And so edge is great habitat for mice, great habitat for chipmunks, great habitat for deer. And, the ticks have made that part of their life cycle as well, living around that edge. One, because it protects them from the sun, but also it's where their hosts are, so where all these different vectors are. So that's where the mice live. So that's where the ticks are. And this is important too for understanding, because now we're getting, I look outside, it's a beautiful day. Finally, we're starting to get into, springtime and closer to summer. This is when the ticks start to come out and we start to have an issue because people are more outside. It's super important to understand that about 75% of people who get Lyme disease are going to get it in their yard or their friend's yard. So Lyme is what we consider paradomestic. So just because we're getting it in our yards. So another way to create edge is to actually have a beautiful garden. So if you ever notice, like when you have gardens, you get a lot of critters in there. And so those same critters are the same ones that are, they're infected with Lyme and then infecting the tick, which then infects you. So it's all just part of that life cycle.
You mentioned the nymph tick. So it's very small when I'm outside, whether it's, in someone else's garden, I don't have my own, or I'm on a trail, or I'm doing whatever I want to do and will be continuing to do to possibly come in contact with a tick. How do I notice a tick, especially if it's so small? What do you got? What do you need to do? Or if you look, can you even miss some of these?
Therein lies the challenge. It's like when I was younger, I got bit by ticks all the time. When I got Lyme disease, I never saw the tick. And you're just like, what am I supposed to be doing? So a couple tips. One is you set yourself up for success. Like one of the things I really like doing is like compression wear, kind of like the sort of compression boxer shorts and compression athletic wear has come into vogue. Those are really good when you're going to be outside, because the ticks like the sort of the dark, damp, warm places. So in the groin, in the armpit, even up in the ears, and then in the hair, right? Amongst other places, but they're sort of really common hiding places. And so if you can kind of wear something that seals it off, that they can't crawl under, that can help. I've also found that a lot of the tick repellent sprays don't work all that well. What I've seen is much better success with things like, I use Honey Birch Farms bug and tick spray. There are a few other herbal sprays. They seem to work better than the commercially available sort of DEET and other things. But when you come in from outside, one of the things to do is to take your clothes off, say in the mudroom or in the garage or on the porch or whatever, and then you can take your clothes and put them in the dryer. And actually, it's the heat that's going to get the tick. So you can actually, if you have ticks on your clothes, you can dry them before you wash them, and then wash and dry them, and you can kill the tick that way. But also, one of the best things to do is after you've been outside and you put your clothes in sort of isolation, is to go take a shower and really just kind of before the tick has a chance to bite you and get hooked into you. When they're just walking around, if you just take a good shower, that can actually help wash them off. We certainly want to do tick checks. It's important, especially for our kids, that we're looking for the ticks. But again, it's hard, man, when they're this little ditzel. It's if you think about it, it's the size of a 12-point font period, which is so hard to see. Or the poppy seed, like we were saying. So again, when you do a couple of these things, the tick checks are necessary, but a lot of times with that nymph, you're not going to see it until it's already biting you and having a blood meal, unfortunately.
I never thought I was so delicious for someone to bite into me for that long. And a question I have in just a moment, but for those watching live on Facebook, happy to take more questions from you, and be sure to like this or share this with anyone you think this is relevant to. And I think mostly it's relevant to probably almost everyone anywhere, but especially where in the United States, if you're living and going outdoors in certain areas, where are these areas, Dr. Tom, that people should be on highest alert to be aware of the likelihood of getting a tick and then getting Lyme disease from it?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think for forever, the Northeast and the mid-Atlantic states have been way up there in the cases, really well known. The people throw around the stats that 95% of the Lyme disease is in the mid-Atlantic and New England states. The other thing, though, that we're seeing that's really important to understand is that we're seeing California has more, even Arizona, a lot of these other areas of the especially the 48 contiguous states. All of these are areas where you could get Lyme disease, where the upper Midwest is becoming more of a hotbed. And as we see global climate change more, we see more and more landscape changes as we develop things. Basically, the more and more we develop wooded lands, the more edge we create, so that we're creating more and more and more habitat for deer, for mice, for chipmunks, and for ticks. So it is spreading. And so I think my biggest concern is for the people outside of the Mid-Atlantic and New England states, because it seems like their guard is a little bit lower. And certainly, like I said, upper Midwest and, California are certainly becoming big hotbeds. But, we're even starting to see things, trickling into a lot of the other states. I mean, certainly the whole Pacific has a fair amount of reported Lyme as well. And every year it seems to be spreading.
Dr. Tom, I want to get into some of the stories, if you're able to share aspects of the individuals that you've worked with over the years, like people that never thought about the fact that they could have had Lyme disease, and they maybe had it for years and years and years. What, after many months and years of not being aware of this, what are some of the symptoms people might be dealing with, that if they have these right now and they're watching now, we're coming across this video later,
yeah,
they should reach out to you or someone that can help them? What might they have if they don't know about it?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the symptoms are, I mean, you start with the classic symptoms of Lyme disease, right? A lot of people know it as summer flu. So we see a lot of joint pains, muscle aches, fatigue, just kind of an off feeling. And then, certainly brain fog and headaches are other ones that come up with Lyme disease acutely. And what we see then is sometimes they come on slowly, and the next thing you know, you're like you were previously fine, and then out of the blue you get diagnosed with fibromyalgia syndrome, or chronic fatigue. But there's really, it doesn't make sense. Your diet's pretty clean, you're sleeping well. And so a lot of the people who come in with chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, they're like, doesn't make sense. There's no one knows this diagnosis, right? Like, why are we not, why don't they have a better answer for me other than, hey, we know what it is now, so it's, just deal with your fatigue, or take an antidepressant. They want to look for another outcome and another potential cause. And that's where a lot of people stumble into going, oh, maybe it was Lyme disease. And in retrospect, oh, you know what? I was bitten by a tick. Maybe they got treatment, maybe they didn't. But then it was like, 3 or 4 months later, their symptoms started. But the other thing that we see a lot of too is when we look at kids, they present differently. So they frequently, they don't always have that classic, sort of joint pain, fatigue thing going on. And the rash, maybe we can talk about the rash at some point in a minute. But, so kids can sometimes have isolated abdominal pain. So your kid who's having belly pain for no reason, they've gone to the gastroenterologist and they've done the big old workup, but they don't know, but they're like, hey, we don't know. They don't have, reflux. They don't have gastritis. So I don't know why they're having their belly pain. And that could be associated with Lyme. And also in children, you can see acute behavioral changes. And so like kids are reading at grade level and then they regress. And so it's like, okay, now they're reading like they're in 3rd grade, but they were previously reading at a 6th grade level. Their handwriting might regress. And very commonly we'll see emotional and behavioral changes. So the sweet kid becomes mean and obstinate, and it's completely out of, it doesn't make sense for where they are in their growth phase, or, they're becoming a teenager and challenging. It's like way beyond anything else you would expect. So, certainly behavioral stuff, and new school challenges where they can't remember things and stuff like that. So, and a lot of times like executives and like people who are out working, managers and stuff will be like, I don't remember that person's name. Like, how do I not know the person's name? I go to a meeting, I forget what we're supposed to be talking about, or I'm like, drawing blanks. I'm having word finding issues. And these are things that sometimes creep up on you, and it's just like, or you get a guy who's in their 40s who night sweats. I mean, what guy in their 40s is going through menopause? Like none of them, so symptoms that don't add up. Or a lot of times if you go to the doctor, you'll be like, you have like 10 different things that don't all kind of meet up. And in medicine, we're always trying to get this thing called Occam's razor, like a single unifying diagnosis. But when you can't add things up, you kind of start scratching your temple and go, hey, maybe this is Lyme or one of the other infections that you can get from a tick.
I had been thinking it. Occasionally it pops up for me, wondering if this is a sign that I'm just getting a little bit older, but maybe at 37, I'm not old enough to have
That's not old.
Okay, well, I have this sort of memory loss that the only thing I can go back to is what I felt when I was really in the worst parts of brain fog. It's not common anymore, so I don't necessarily want to attribute it to a lasting effect, but maybe you would, that when I go for a more simple memory than I would think, it's just not there. And it surprises me sometimes why I can't remember things, but it's not that often. So I don't want to necessarily attribute it to a long-term effect from Lyme disease, but maybe it is.
I think that it's about the consistency of the symptom. I mean, if you're once in a while forgetting things, maybe that's attributed to something else. I mean, so many other things that affect how your brain functions, sleep being, food choices being really big on the list, as well as stress. And certainly what I've found is that there are times where I have a lot of stress, there's a lot of stuff going on, and I'm like, what? Or I missed some sleep last night because I had a big project to finish up. And the next day it's like, I'm just not as sharp, maybe. And in my 20s, I had more resiliency. But if you consistently are like, hey, my diet's pretty good, I'm relaxing, I'm getting relatively good sleep, I have normal stress, it's not super high. And then you're consistently seeing that the brain function isn't there. You're missing, kind of missing words, that you can't recall memories. Then you start to wonder. I mean, and there's certainly a lot of other exposures that could cause that. Mold or heavy metals. There's a lot of things. But again, it should be more of a consistent pattern. The other thing is, when we're in our late 30s and we're moving into our 40s and a little bit beyond, then what we start to do is we see that our brains kind of work differently. So in the beginning, we could learn stuff really, really, really rapidly and easily, but it would take us a while to figure out how to be able to teach it well. We might have thought we could teach it well, but the reality is maybe we're usually, as we get into our a little closer to 40 and through our 40s, we're really learning how to teach others better, and we're using our brain in a different way than before. And so, there is a shift. So we're maybe not as sharp and learning new things so quickly as we get older, but we're able to sort of consolidate things and sort of teach them better. So there's also that thing. And I think we're so aware of that now, because before everybody's like, oh, that's just getting old, and everybody's like, oh, and now we're like, no, getting old is not the right answer. I mean, 97 is old, 37, not old. So there's certainly ways you can work on longevity. You can optimize your hormones. You can optimize your sleep. Everybody's in the biohacking, it seems like these days. But it really, when you go back to Lyme disease, I would expect a more consistent pattern of that brain fog than sort of a relatively intermittent thing.
Okay, so based on that answer,
you're in good shape.
Can I say that I've been cured of it, or are you never fully cured?
I think that's a question. That's the multi-million-dollar question. And I always go back to, kind of what's going on with me right now. Because I had infection. It looks like after I was treated, I had about 8 years of ongoing symptoms, and then I was diagnosed with, active infections. I got them treated over the course of about 4.5 years, and I haven't had a symptom that I can attribute to that in over a decade. So the question is, am I actually, am I cured, or is there some little bits of it living in a persister form living in my body? And I've had some athletic injuries, and every once in a while, the shoulder that I busted up, man, it gets triggered for like, a day. And maybe every once in a while, I'm like, ow, man, I didn't do anything. Why did that hurt? But it was 10 minutes and it's gone, and I don't feel that again for 2 years. Yeah. So is it possible that there's a little bit of Lyme disease that wakes up every once in a while? My body just knocks it right out, and I'm in good shape. That's entirely possible. But to me, I've taken antibiotics and herbals for different kinds of infections, and I've not responded in a way that makes it look like I had what they call a die-off or a Herxheimer reaction from Lyme. And I've certainly burnt the candle at both ends quite a bit, and sometimes given myself a little extra stress than I probably needed. And I've been fine. I've gotten tired, a little brain foggy. I get one night of sleep and I'm right back. So to me, I've really stressed my body. There was a summer where I cycled 6,000 miles on my bicycle, and I was fine. So under those amounts of stress, I can't make Lyme disease come out. So I'm calling myself cured for 10 years or more. And I see a lot of people like that, where we're not 100% sure they're cured because we don't have the test to tell us that, but they haven't had a symptom in 3 years. And they continue to follow up, and we just make sure they're in good shape. And so I think they can be cured. Now, we also have a group of people who have persistent symptoms. And, sometimes these are the people who have done everything right. They do the lifestyle, they modify their sleep and their diet and their sleep, and their stress reduction is all optimal. They've gotten the mold out of their house. They've worked on metals, and like everything's pristine, and they still have some symptoms. And then I think there is a small group of people that aren't going to get better. But in Lyme disease, I also see the people who tend to stay sick the longest, either it took a long time to get to their diagnosis, or they're not really willing to make the other changes that are necessary. And it's really interesting right now because with the whole COVID-19 thing going on and everybody wondering how to prevent like the second wave stuff, most of the recommendations that I would make for that are the same recommendations I would make as your foundational treatments for Lyme disease, as well as if you want to live as long as possible, as healthy as possible, with your brain working as best as possible and your hormones as optimal as possible. Same kind of recommendations, right? So adults need to sleep 8 or 9 hours a night. When you look at things like eating, get rid of the processed foods and the simple sugars. We need to be eating a plant-based diet, and then whatever else you're eating, add that to it. So like if you like steak and you like chicken or you like fish, add them after you eat. It's essentially be a vegan and then add on whatever else you want, but be that vegetable person first. And, it's really important too to get out and get some sunshine and some fresh air, especially in the morning, because a lot of what we want to do is trigger our body to start making melatonin. And so the sunlight in the morning, which is our sleep hormone, but we actually start making it in the first thing in the morning when we see light. And then at night, as it gets darker, we should be turning down our lights, and if we can't really turn down our lights or get off our screens, at least wear like a blue blocking lens, with glasses that look a little orange or yellow to cut down on disturbing your circadian rhythm that melatonin creates. Because in the evening, when we see darkness, that's what triggers our body to let the melatonin out. And melatonin not only helps you sleep, but it also is very anti-inflammatory, which is really helpful in things like Lyme and COVID-19. And then, the other part that creates melatonin is your gut. So you have tons of melatonin created in your gut. So your diet is really important for your ability to create melatonin. And so it's interesting. It's like when you go back to the brain part of this, when you're sleeping, that's primarily when your brain detoxifies. And it looks like you need to get into deep sleep for that. And if your gut is off, that'll disrupt your sleep. And if your sleep is off, that'll disrupt your gut. So this sort of gut, brain, heart axis is really critical. And I added in that last piece of the heart because we need to do things like, gratitude and getting ourselves sort of in a heart-centered state where we calm down our nervous system, where we sort of become what we would call parasympathetic, which is our rest and rejuvenation state. And those kind of things are really critical, whether you have Lyme, whether you're just stressed out, or whether you want to, you have COVID-19 or you want to prevent yourself from having a bad event if you get exposed to the virus. So all of these things are really interesting, to me at least, to that interplay. So it's really the sleep, the diet, the gentle body movement, and the relaxation that are going to help you. And what we find is if we add a little bit of like intermittent fasting on top of the food, where we're shortening our eating window, maybe to not eating for 12 hours and eventually not eating for 16, along with that plant-based diet, not only do we bring down inflammation and lose weight, but that actually will help optimize hormones and optimize longevity. And so I feel like I'm rambling a little bit because it's exciting though, because these are simple things that everybody listening could do at home that will make a huge difference no matter what your health outcome that you're looking for is.
I'm going to slide the conversation, I guess, further away from specifically Lyme disease at this point. But if anyone else has any question related to Lyme disease, whether or not we've covered it and you missed it because we weren't on yet, or you want some clarification, please ask that question, or anything else health related. I guess we have a few more minutes here with Dr. Tom. One thing I really like about you and our conversations together, observing you at Super HIT in Arizona, where we met a few months ago. And also, I've listened to you on, I think, a podcast or two in preparation for my conversation with you. And it came out pretty clear in what you were just saying there of all of the natural ways that people that maybe end up being unwell aren't doing the things in their day-to-day life that perhaps or frequently or almost always are the cause of whatever is ailing them. But one thing I noticed, you seem to be very into like learning all the advanced sciences, whatever is happening in the medical world. You're on top of that, at least from the way that you talk, but also the day-to-day life stuff. So explain to me, in Connecticut on a given day right now with COVID-19, and I'm sure your style of your operation there in Connecticut's different. What is a day like for you as you're trying to both learn as much as you can and help other people? What's life like right now for Dr. Tom?
Yeah, life's busy. It was funny in the very beginning of this, I really had to remind myself to follow my own recommendations because I got so busy trying to help that you're staying up late and getting up early. One of the most important things for me is family time. It's really, there's certainly days that come up where I don't always get a chance to get as much as I'd want, but definitely quality family time it's very grounding for me. And a lot of it is finding that balance. I make sure that I have enough time so that I can actually sleep for 8 hours, which means I need to carve out about 8.5 to 9 hours of sleep time because there's a little time getting ready for bed and a little time kind of getting up. It really makes sleep a big thing. And we have 2 dogs. They're a little on the older side, both 15, one's 15, one's 16. And so, yeah, right. But they're still kicking. I mean, one's hips aren't so good, but the 15-year-old still thinks he's 2. I mean, so we try to practice what we preach here.
Yeah, I'm 37, and I like to think that I've kind of lived my life backwards, where I'm living my 20s and my 30s, and I kind of live my 30s and my 20s, if that even makes sense. Yep. But I realize that if I keep a young mindset, even at the equivalent of your older aging dog that acts like it's 2, I hope that I can still be young well beyond the numbers that we used to consider to be old.
Yeah, I think it's critical to understand that you have a choice in this, right? You can optimize your long-term health outcome. And it's just like if you want to have a business and you want to make a business succeed, you create a business plan. And if you want to be healthy, you go and create a health plan. And if you want to have financial freedom, whatever that means to you, you put down a number and you figure out ways to get there. You're like, you plan for retirement. But it's funny from the health plan perspective, a lot of us are just kind of like doing our day-to-day thing. And when we go to the doctor, I got a good checkup, so I'm in good shape. My question is like, I mean, that's okay, but what do you want life to really be like? I mean, because it's like, if you look at like the strong men of old, they did most of their feats of strength in their 40s and 50s, which 50 or 60 years ago, that was really kind of much older than 50 or 60 now. And what we're seeing is if you create a goal, like an outcome, like if you think about what you want your health to be like in a year from now, and then you say, okay, maybe you have Lyme disease and your knees are killing you, or maybe you just have osteoarthritis or depression. Where do I want to be in a year? Okay, well, I want to be able to, kneel on the ground, right, with your bad knees. And so you say, okay, well, why do I want to kneel on the ground? Well, maybe I want to kneel on the ground because I have kids or grandkids that I want to be able to get down on the floor and play with. So then you say, okay, what's the emotion of doing that? What's it going to feel like when you can regularly hop up and down and your knees are working, you can do hang out with your kids, or you can go skiing again or whatever. What's that emotion? Start to feel that emotion now, and start to feel that emotion like on a regular basis. Start living in what that feeling will be. Because if you don't plan, or if you have a negative plan, the likelihood of you having a negative longer term outcome is high. But if you have a positive plan, you at least give yourself a 50% chance of getting there, if not a lot more. And so I'm always about take a look at what you want dream big. What do you want your future to look like? And if I love skiing, and I more recently got back into it because of our daughter in the last 3 years. And I'm like, man, I just missed 20 years as one of the things I love the most. And I'm like, but I'm not, I'm in my 46 right now. And I'm like, I'm going to be skiing in my 60s. Nothing's stopping me. And I know what it feels like to ski and how good it feels right now. And that's exactly how good I want it to feel then. So I don't even have to, it's like, you don't have to go to the future to find the emotion. It's like if you're in your 20s and your knees felt great and you're on the top of the world. If you want to be that way when you're 60, start feeling the way you did in your 20s. But say, when I'm 60, I'm going to feel that way. But then start to feel it that way today as well, and start living that way. And it's amazing. The universe will bring you all you need to go in that direction. It's really about figuring out the what, not the how, right? The how will come. But when you have that plan, the weird stuff will start to happen in your world that will help you get better. And it's interesting. It brings me back to how I got better from Lyme disease, because I have a couple of people who have had some really hard times with this, and they've suffered a lot. And so I said to him, I was like, some kid one day asked me, and he had Asperger's syndrome. So it was like he has no filter, so I mean, literally no social filter whatsoever. So any word he thought of was fair game. And so he said, so how did you get better? How did you know you were going to get better? And I said, because I said F you to Lyme and babesiosis, because I had better things to be doing. And I didn't focus on being sick. I focused on what I wanted to be doing. And because I had the energy and I had the dream to do that in the future, that was the thing that allowed me to get through today and the drudgery of taking the medicines, taking the supplements, clean up my diet. Why do I want to eat a good diet when I could eat a bunch of crap that tastes really good right now? Well, because I know my body works better and feels better, my brain works better, and my emotions are more settled when I don't eat this crap. And the reason I knew that it was, in the beginning, I didn't. But I took the chance and started to listen to my body when that opportunity presented itself. And I did like an experiment. My body doesn't seem to like this soda anymore. What if I get rid of it? Okay, now it's like, now I don't have it. I feel great. If I have it, I feel bad. So, okay, let's leave that out. And it's like you learn as you start to plan what you want your future to look like, from health, from finances to relationship, whatever it is, that's when you can get into this space where you start to hear what your body's really trying to tell you, really hear what your emotions are telling you. And I think that that's where all the gold is here, because you have the power to do all that. Like right now with COVID-19, so much control seems to have been taken away from us. We have to stay at home. We have to wear a mask. We might not be able to go to work. We might have lost our job. We can't get the food we always want, and so on and so forth. The virus is acting really bizarre in different age groups. We have power over certain parts of our lives right now. So, take control of that piece. And as you know, from everything we do, like in super and HIT and core, I mean, it's really about, there's all these ways that you can help other people with what we've learned. But what we really know is that the most important person to help first is ourselves. So that's really, if that's the only thing that I can teach everybody, because the root word for physician, comes from the Greek meaning teacher. And if the only thing I teach anybody is that they have tons of control over their own health with their choices, I mean, that'll be a life well lived for me.
There was a lot in there, but I want to go back to one of the first things you said.
Yeah, sorry. You get me going. I'm like, whoop.
No worries on that. Every year when I go in for my physical, I'm always excited and like proud of myself that there's no issues. Like everything they test for is like really good for my age group.
Yeah.
But you make a good point that I'm leaving there feeling like, yeah, I'm doing things right, but I know I can do so many things better. So not that I'm wanting this, but I wouldn't be surprised if I got a kick in the butt with, some kind of bad news one time in a physical, I'd probably step it up quite a bit, but I'd rather not have to wait for that news to make even better choices.
Exactly.
So it's something for me to think about. And
if you think about and if you think about what's going on with COVID-19 right now, the people we know who are consistently having the worst outcomes are people with lifestyle diseases, right? And certainly there are people who are older. And I mean, my heart goes out to everybody, but I'm just going to let people know that if you want to bring control back, take control over the things you can control, which is these lifestyle diseases, things like diabetes, heart disease, obesity and smoking, including vaping. These are things that you can change. And the beauty of a lot of this stuff is they've done studies on, like, even if you just do meditation, or there's a thing called eco meditation. It's a kind of a combination of EFT tapping and meditation. You can do it for 7 days and you can double some of your immune system markers. They can see 108% increase in salivary IgA levels with 7 days of this eco meditation. And if you look in the research, there's all kinds of things. You don't have to do a lot, and you don't have to do it for a long time to start to have the benefits in your body. But what we do know is that if you want to have that benefit remain and get kind of compound interest on it, you need to do something consistently. So my recommendation, and I went off on my little soapbox of the things you need to do. Pick one thing that sounds like you can almost do it. You're going to have to try hard to do it, but you're going to be able to succeed. And just pick one, whether it's your sleep, whether it's your food, whether it's taking 5 minutes every day to do a breath awareness meditation, or just breath awareness, whatever. Just know you're breathing, right? That's pretty non-denominational. Just breathe and know you're breathing for 5 minutes. And what you'll see is that'll bring down your nervous system. Or even if what? Dr. Tom, I'm inspired. I'm going to take my dogs out every morning for 5 or 10 minutes to get fresh air. Instead of just letting them out in the yard, I'm going to go out with them. And it literally, if you choose one thing and you do it for a week, there will be physiological benefits. Whether you feel them or not, I can measure them. And then as you make something simple a habit, you're going to go, oh, I did something simple, but I did it. And now you can add a second thing. Right. So now maybe rather than removing, a lot of people, like right now, I'm like, don't have your kid, if their diet's crap, don't have them remove all the soda. If they're not that anybody should drink soda. Shouldn't even be a thing. But if it is in your lifestyle, let's say you have 3 sodas a day. So go down to 2.5 or 2 and just do that. That will make a difference. That will bring down inflammation. That will help your gut start to heal. And then after you do 2, you see you could do that, instead of 3 a day, you do 2 a day for a week or 2. Then you go, hey, what? I can actually do this. I'm going to go down to 1. And I'm going to, and it's like you make these small changes gradually that compound. Because the problem is what we see is so many people, COVID-19, boom, let's do everything. And 2 weeks later, you can't keep it up. And now you're like, now you're out at a rally that says, let me out of my house. When all you did was stop your soda and freak out. It's like, let's just take our time, pick one thing to do and do it consistently. Put it in your phone, get an alarm every day at the same time. Here's your 10 minutes for you, and make it a habit. Once one thing became a habit, now you can make habits. So, and then you take the next step and do something else. And it makes a huge difference in the long run.
I certainly have my challenges with some of the things you mentioned. The soda, what I learned years ago, and I somehow succeeded in this, and it works most of the time, is I know if there's soda at my disposal, it's in my reach, I'm going to drink it more than I should. But if I'm at the grocery store, I don't buy it to bring it home just to have it around. And that's always been for me, whether it's that or any of the unhealthy food choices that I occasionally will make if it's in front of me.
Like everyone,
whatever, but I don't want to bring it home with me from the grocery store. So when I go grocery shopping, it's really healthy food, most of it. It's kind of shocking to me how I can do that, where maybe years ago I would have added a few more things that obviously weren't good for me. And I guess for me, it always starts there.
Well, and I think it's also about finding, like for me in the beginning, it was about a substitute, right? Because I just didn't know enough. Back when I started to not like soda, I had chronic Lyme. I actually didn't even know what it was. It just told me I had fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue back then. And I started doing yoga because a friend gave me a DVD. Thankfully, I'm so blessed to have them and grateful to have them in my life to share that with me. But what was really interesting is I started going, when I was on working at different hospitals, they would have like the Poland Spring sparkling water with orange in it or lemon. And so I started drinking those. I'm like, wait, they're bubbly and they taste good. And I don't have a crash after them. And so I've made it a habit of, I still drink, carbonated water, but that is what got me off a lifetime of soda for 27 years, and also it's like, and I think it's like, find something that remove a little something. And like I think what you said is brilliant. Just go to the store and just don't grab everything, make it harder to get. But also find look through like healthy recipes and stuff. Find something, try a couple of them out and find one you like and make it a lot. It doesn't have to be variety all the time. It could just be, hey, this is what I want. And so I think that that's a really a good option as well. But as we learn more and we listen to our bodies more, and I think COVID-19 is a cool time, as much as the suffering is terrible and it's scary at times. I think it's a wake-up call to us that we need to understand that what we should be doing is making the choices that are going to help us in the long run. So it's short-term gain, pleasure and gain versus longer-term gain. And we're learning that it's okay to have some of these things. Like, I'll be honest, during COVID-19, we've been having a little bit more ice cream than usual, It's like, but we get super high fat and natural relatively lower sugar, but it's still got sugar in it, I'll admit. But but it's also organic cane sugar and stuff, and I try to be the best I can. But what you do is we're each having like these minuscule little, essentially like if you're a chef, like a quenelle, but 2 mini scoops. But rather than going, hey, we're super, there's a lot of weird stuff going on, and we have a 10-year-old, rather than being a monk and not having anything good, we're having a little bit of it here and there, maybe 3 or 4 days in a row. Then we take a break for a little while. So we're balancing out sort of the comfort part of it with the other part of it, So it's not I don't think it's, and I know I have colleagues who would disagree with me, but I don't think it's this be all end all. You have to do this whole one diet. Now, if you're really sick and you need to change and you want to get healthy, then maybe you need to be on a therapeutic diet for a while. But when you get back into eating, I think if you can do 90% healthy eating and 10% kind of chill, maybe a little more chill out. And if like in the winter, I might be a little more 80-20, because when you're skiing, sometimes it's not as easy and you want to hang out with your friends. But in the summer, I'm like 95% spot on, 5%, give myself some leeway. Other people love to hang out at the beach in the summer, go, do barbecues and such and whatever. And maybe they're into the chips then. So maybe they're 80% sort of good and 20%, kind of playing with some of the processed stuff is in the summer. But diets are about a lifestyle, right? A diet is not, we use it as a term to say, hey, I'm going to lose 10 pounds before I go to a wedding, so I'm going to do a diet. But really, a diet describes your eating lifestyle. And so what I always recommend is that if you have a specific health issue, you really probably want to look at that, right? You want to be more specific. And the sicker you are, the more pristine you have to be on your particular diet. But for the rest of us who we just want to optimize our health, we want to promote longevity, we want to just feel good and be around for a long time and, optimize our immune function, we have more flexibility. And don't beat yourself up. Make it a eating lifestyle, make it a movement lifestyle, make it a sleeping lifestyle. And all of these are part of your health lifestyle. So if you fall off the wagon, so to speak, for a day or two or a week, no big deal. You go on vacation, no problem. Just the more you're moving in that direction of the longer term, the longer play, the health lifestyle, the better you're going to be.
Here's a question from a previous guest of the podcast, Blessing. She was on one of the early episodes, one of the first 10 episodes. And that's something I forget, because I can drive over to the local Aldi. I can take as much of the produce aisle as I want. I can afford it. Everything's okay. Not everybody can either afford as much, or I know some rural parts of the country, the grocery shopping's done often at like a Dollar General, which doesn't have fresh produce. It might have some frozen stuff, but doesn't have that much for healthy food. Or maybe some inner cities, the supermarkets with the produce just don't exist. So for people that can't as easily get around and buy what they want and need, like you and I, people with some low socioeconomic issues where they either have Lyme disease or something else, Blessing wonders, how do you get these types of health changes when the healthy food isn't just as available to you for whatever reasons?
Right. I mean, that is a challenge. And it's certainly one. It's interesting when I read the question as it popped up, you just feel the heaviness in your heart, where I want everyone to have access to the best that, for their health. And I would love for, food stamps and other things to really be focused on healthy, nourishing food. I would love for, I even had somebody used to work for me. They're telling me they're eating ramen every day for lunch. And I'm like, why are you doing that? They're like, because it's 40 cents. I'm like, an entire pack of ramen noodles is 40 cents. It is literally cheaper to eat ramen noodles, like the super processed, not the fancy handmade at the place, in the package, and microwave it. I mean, how is that cheaper to eat that than lettuce? I mean, so I think what Blessing is saying is a real challenge. So, I mean, a couple things I think about is, and again, my frustration is, sugary processed foods are cheaper than whole foods, right? Mm-hmm. Which is not the store, but the actual, what it really means, which is like plant-based, real plants. So, it's a challenge there. And I think that parents have to do the best they can. I mean, certainly frozen, bagged, or canned veggies are probably better than none. And I like fresh when you can get it. But the other part would be I wish I had a good answer on how to fix that. I know there are a lot of people this is part of their mission. And certainly I'm always supportive when we can get into that. But it's a big issue. This would be a place where, with Lyme disease, the first thing I would do is make sure you're getting adequate treatment, like medical treatment. But the other part would also be, this is a time where I might focus on one of the other pieces first, when we might not be able to have access to the foods we want, but we can certainly work on, sleep as an example. We certainly, that is something that we have more control over. And it may require the parents to kind of change their evening around and spend more quality time turning off the televisions and sitting down and talking to the kids, but that might be a place to start working. The food is a rough one. I mean, I feel like, I would love to have a really good answer now, because I feel like there's that little dagger being stuck in your heart, because it's hard. You make the best choices you can in that environment. And certainly, one of the other things that can be really helpful in Lyme and other things is movement. What we know is that in the arms and the legs, the way the lymphatic system drains toxins and helps with the immune recognition of invaders is through muscle contraction. So movement of the arms and the legs. In the chest and the belly area and the pelvis, it's through pressure gradient changes, so deep breathing. And certainly from the brain, there's a little bit of gravity, and a lot of it's during sleep. So if we work on the kids and getting them out and letting them play more, letting them do things like jumping up and down, rebounders are really good. Again, those are things that you don't have to go buy, but you can mimic. You can get them, jumping up and down at the at the park, at the swing set. You can certainly do jumping jacks or whatever, but get them to a point where they're breathing heavily through movement. That will help with optimized lymphatic drainage and also help them be more tired to go to sleep. So while, it would be great to have everybody be able to walk into a grocery store that's got all veggies everywhere, and it's a farmer's market, and you just pick up what you need and you leave and you don't have to pay because that's been taken care of. All that would be wonderful. It'd be great if we could, all of us had access to all of it. But when you don't, again, pick something different and work on that as best you can. But it's a challenge from the food perspective, without a doubt.
Yeah, those are questions that I know a lot of people, you're only kind of thinking about the things that affect you and what you've been presented with. And there's a whole different group of people and different groups of people with other challenges out there. So it's really good to have the compassion for the possibility that we don't always think about the things that other people are dealing with. So that was I'm like, well, cut down.
I wanted to say, cut down on a little bit of sugar. Well, it's cheaper than real food. Cut down on the processed food. It's cheaper than real food. I mean, and unfortunately, that's the society we live in. And it is something that those of us who maybe have more access can keep in the back of our minds and be great, and in our hearts be grateful for. And maybe part of the thing that I revise my vision for my future. And one of the things that I always keep adding in there is a way to have kids in general be more healthy, to help lead a movement across the globe where not only everyone's healthier, but kids are healthier and they have more access to the things they need. So I think I'm going to sit down later and tweak it a little bit, because I think there's the more and more specific you can become, the more likely you are to help. And I find that whenever people ask me that question or some variation of it, I'm like, I should be doing more. There's got to be a way to do more. And right now I might not know how to do that. But again, going back to, I don't need to know how to do it. I just need to know what I want to do and then put my heart into doing that. And then the how will come. And then when it presents itself, I have to take action. So I have a lot of gratitude for Blessing right now, because I'm going to add that. I got my workbook right here that it all goes into. So I'll be adding more specifics to that, because that's something that we really all need to be thinking about for the health of, at least that I want to be thinking more about for the health of the planet.
And she works as a nurse. She's been in the Minneapolis area, different parts of California, currently now in Tennessee. So she's coming across different groups of people all the time in different parts of the country. So I do want to go back to you. You're in Connecticut. You've been there, lifelong Connecticut guy?
No, I actually grew up in New Jersey, and then I went up to Vermont and Maine. I kind of like the Vermont, Maine, Colorado, Utah thing a little bit more than right here, but it's a pretty nice place to be.
So for you, whether it's right now, Lyme disease, anything else, I guess you can go over all of your different areas that you can help people. But if someone's not located in Connecticut, but they like what they've heard from you, they want to work with you, what are some of the ways that someone might be able to reach out to you and you could help someone?
Yeah. So a lot of free resources. My website is originsofhealth.com. And also our Facebook page, same thing, Origins of Health. I try to keep where you have a lot more blog stuff coming out on the website. We have multiple. I did a summit and a mini series on COVID-19. A lot of it's ways to do things at home without spending money, because a lot of us are getting more challenged. Those are free resources. A lot of the people who are guests on those, we link to a lot of their free resources as well. It's really been a time where we want to give as best we can. We on Facebook have a Lyme support group called Empowered by Lyme, and that's free. You just have to ask to join. We'll ask a couple questions and let you in. The goal really is to get people to be able to ask questions and have positive support. There's so much negativity. And if you're having a bad day, people come in and they say, I'm having a bad day. And then it's uplifting rather than having a complaining session. It's really about working together for the whole community to uplift all the members. And, if anybody, I'm able to, see people in the office once and then able to see them from a distance. So if there's, say, somebody in California or Utah or whatever who would like to be seen as sort of a medical patient, they can come out, we can do an appointment, and then we can do most of our follow-ups virtually. And people in Connecticut and New York, I can actually do virtual care, starting, at least for the time being, we're allowed to do that. from, just initiating care virtually. So a lot of options. And certainly I have a new series that'll be coming out soon. So if anybody's interested in, we're going to be doing stuff on Lyme and COVID and just general topics that are going to, sort of build on a lot of the things that we've talked about today, where it's going to be, we're really going to show people what the long play is for getting healthy and staying healthy, but tweaking it based upon all the new research that's coming out. So it's sort of going to be a little riff on a podcast. I'm super excited because it's like, I'm not even sure what it's fully going to look like, but it's kind of got to be like these weekly webinars. It's so much fun and going to have different guests on talking about topics as they come up. So, and really getting them out right as they happen. So that should be a lot of fun. So a lot of different ways. And if anybody has any questions and needs some help, I mean, certainly just reach out through Facebook we're at Origins of Health, or contact our office at the website.
That's one of the beauties of creating something and putting it online. Like, you have these ideas and trying to firm them up as you go, and just knowing that if you're doing it because you want to be able to reach people and help them. So that's why I started a podcast. And I usually finish with a couple segments. I'm going to boil them down to one because I'm very interested in what you have to say. So I have a personal growth segment and a being wrong segment. They're kind of similar. Because what I want from you, Dr. Tom, is a story of something, how you've really focused on personal growth, and depending how you take it, something that you've totally changed your mind about, and you could look at the former version of yourself and say that you were wrong. So it's really what this podcast is all about, the ways that I've learned from people and learned and changed my way of being. I want to hear one final story from you of how your life is changing or has changed, and the background behind that.
Wow. I love it, man. Those are powerful. I made it a habit of admitting I was wrong a long time ago and learning from that. And as a doctor, I found that was one of the best things I could ever do. I'm going to have to think about that one for a second, because it's like you do it so much. It's like, I don't carry it around. What I remember is when I didn't know what was wrong with me with Lyme and babesiosis, and also turns out heavy metal toxicity, a friend of mine gave me a yoga DVD, and I said, wow, all right, let's check it out. And so my wife and I started doing it, and it felt like something was really good, but there was something really wrong about it. It was like it was movement on breath, but I felt like it wasn't moving well. And I looked at the end, and I said, what did in the credits, where did this guy learn? And I went back and I researched Ashtanga Yoga, which is where power yoga comes from. And I studied that. And when I started doing that, it was like, movement with breath. It made sense. And it was a moving meditation. And so I always was drawn to meditation, but I said to myself, I could never do this because I have to sit still and my brain won't calm down. And so I started doing this yoga, and all of a sudden, like, I want to not have soda, and I don't want to eat processed foods, and I want a salad. And then I was an athlete my whole life. I could literally, my hands could barely touch my kneecaps, which is kind of pathetic because my arms can pretty much touch them, like, it's like the length of my arms. Mm-hmm. I was so tight. And over a period of 6 months, we did 6 days a week, the yoga. We took off the new moon and the full moon as was prescribed. And I just followed it 90 minutes a day. And I'll tell you, my whole life changed. I got so loose and open. And, it was a good almost 2 years before I sort of started to add other things back into my program. It was just focused on the yoga. And what I really learned was, if I put my mind to one thing and I do it regularly, even when it's hard, I will start to see results. And out of that, interestingly, you learn that when you're in a difficult posture, a lot of people always are trying to win, right? You're trying to get further in the posture. Well, what you should be doing is, what they say is that if you can't breathe fully, you're going too hard. You're pushing your body too much. It's not ready. And so I really learned that it was basically learning to be calm under physical stress, which is also emotional stress when you're, you're balancing and you're falling all over. And so all of a sudden, 6 or 8 months into this yoga practice, at the end, when you sit down cross-legged and you just breathe, my mind was much calmer. And then like 18 months into it, I started doing a meditation practice because I actually could sit. And so I just thought I could never sit, but to do anything, because my brain was too crazy. But what I needed was a different approach to getting there, because anybody will sit down long enough, it'll work. But I was so hyper aware and so ADHD that I just needed movement, and movement brought me to it. So there's not always one way to get to a destination, I learned. And I learned that really, if I put my mind to it, it makes a massive difference. And that's been one of the biggest shifts, I would say, my entire life. I can't think of one, other than, meeting my wife and recognizing we should be together. This is like one of those aha moments where I don't do it all the time now, because I weave other pieces into my health practice. But it was just like, I wanted to feel better. And then an opportunity was presented to me, and I said, I don't even understand this. I'm going to do it anyway. Right. And I asked for it, and it came into my life. So I went for it. And I guess I was wrong. It's not a good, you're wrong story, but I thought I would never be able to sit and get the benefits of meditation because I was too active, but I learned that there is a way for all of us to get our goals. It just might not be the way we think. So set your goal, and then you can, maybe there's a different way to get there for you, and that how will present itself.
And telling yourself that you're not going to be able to do it, whatever it is, probably means you're not going to do it. So just allowing yourself to be pushed in the direction a little bit, just say, maybe. That's, I think, the first step to changing your mind about anything that could prove to be very vital in your life.
I think so. And I think it's also when you have a little bit of fear and you have a little bit of unsureness, when that stuff, that's the time to lean into it, not to pull away. Right. So, and in that situation, like if you're afraid to go down a dark alley, don't lean more into that. But you know what I mean? But it's like, there's so many times where we look at what's quote unquote a challenge in our lives, and I can't do that. Well, why not? You can. And it's like, so for me, I've learned that I listen to my gut, but when I get a little bit of the jitters, that's the time to go for it. It was amazing. Like a month ago, when I did a 3-hour live summit on a weekend with some friends to help support our global community. And I said, I just had an idea, and I said to somebody I should do this. They're like, I'll help you. And then I just sent off a bunch of emails, and I was like, holy shit, what did I just do? How am I going to do this? But in the end, that's been seen by over 5,000 people. And I was afraid to do it. And I get mail all the time saying, thank you for doing that. Thank you for sharing. It's been so helpful. And I'm like, I was afraid to do. And that's one of the 2 largest events I've ever done personally. I have reached more people by doing that event and a subsequent event that I had reached probably in the past 10 years. And I got afraid. And instead of pulling back from it with the cold feet, I leaned into it. And everybody listening can do that too. And the cool part is whether it's 5,000 or 500,000 people or one person, if that's you, it doesn't matter the number. It's the vibration of that impact that really makes the biggest difference, in my opinion.
I think that's a great answer to encapsulate personal growth, being wrong and changing your mind. And I think it's super important just to sometimes say yes. I probably can't say yes to everything thrown your way. Yes, not to the dark alley, but say yes without thinking about it, and then deal with it and do what it takes to get there. Yeah.
And you just reminded me of what I hope is a good, I'm wrong. In this time, my family is so close. We do so much together. We love each other so much. But man, even under all of this and all the personal development we do, we're doing, we're doing a couple programs together, even with our 10-year-old, we're doing all this sort of like dream building and personal growth. But even though that's the way we live our lifestyle, with the COVID-19 thing going on and the separate, Talia doesn't get to see all her friends like for real. It's kind of all virtual. And we have tons of support, but we're still kind of, you get on each other's nerves a little bit. We've had a couple days where I was probably not as nice and I was a little more snippy than I even want to admit being, and there was a time where I lost my temper a little bit, and I just was like, oh my God, what is going on? Like, I know where it bubbled up from. Why was I unable to say to my family, hey, I need space here. I'm getting a little too stressed. And so really when that happened, I was like, you take your time to chill out. But I went back to my family. I said, you know what? These things were happening, but I'm really sorry. And I was wrong for that. And all three of us have had different things where we've come up and we've said to each other, I'm sorry, I could have helped a little more in that position, in that situation. And I think it's a really important time for us all to remember that we are under a stress that we've not been under before. And I'm like you, Curt. I mean, sometimes it's like, man, I love tortilla chips. Try not to eat them a lot, but man, give me some homemade guacamole and some fancy corn chips. Maybe I'm going to dig in,
Maybe.
And it's like,
maybe.
What's that?
Maybe. Yeah, sure. Maybe.
Maybe. It's not, we're not all perfect, and we do make mistakes. And sometimes when you make that mistake of saying, hey, being short with someone, I think it's not so much about being wrong. It's about what we do when we are wrong. And it's really easy if I make a mistake, like when I worked in the hospital and stuff, I'd be like, I don't know the answer to that, or I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Let me fix it. This is what happened. This is what we're going to do. At home, it seems to be the hardest. And so I just want everyone to have a sense that right now, we're going to be acting sometimes in ways we may not want to be, but it's what we do with that under that stress. And when we go back to our family and say, Jill, Talia, I was wrong, and I'm really sorry for doing that, and I was sorry that I lost my temper. It's not my usual. It's so important to just have that, that ability to just say that, I was wrong and I'm sorry, especially during these crazy ass times that a lot of us are going through. So,
I think
just like to share that it happens to all of us.
Of course, it happens to all of us. And I think the big key then is the instinct to not defend why you weren't wrong, just to be okay that sometimes I'm going to be wrong. That's why I have the sign back here. You can't see it fully, but
oh yeah, mistakes will happen.
Biggest guest of the podcast, Philip G. He does some art on his spare time, and he made this. And although I think it's kind of negative if you take it the wrong way, but I think it's beautifully positive that, okay, there's going to be some mistakes sometimes, and that's fine. Just be okay with it. Acknowledge that, yeah, I was wrong. I made a mistake, and move forward instead of always trying to act like I know everything or I can't make a mistake, which I know some people get caught in, and I get caught in sometimes, but it's an ego thing we need to avoid. Yeah.
And I mean, I think the beauty of what mistakes will happen means is that it's legit. It's around. Things happen. It's just, it happened. Right? It's not, you don't have to make a judgment of it. To me, it's not always the act. It's like what follows it up, because I don't want to, and also it's also not always the person, right? I mean, so like if you do something that I don't like, I can either say Curt's a jerk, or I can say I didn't like what Curt did. But I know that most of the time Curt doesn't do that, and I really like him. So, and it's like, so I appreciate that in my family, they're like, hey, Dad's a little stressed out here. Tom he's doing a lot to help other people, and he forgot about us for a few minutes. And so then, we work together and we say, hey, I don't like his actions. His actions weren't right, but I still love the person, and I'm going to help them take that next step. And then as the person who may have, lost their temper or made that mistake, you just say, hey, I made a mistake. I'm really sorry about that. It's not what I really feel in my heart. What can we do to continue to move forward? And that's really, I think, what's beautiful about right now, this time with COVID-19. There's so many things that we are just not good. They don't feel good. People are suffering. But I have never in my life seen the world become so positive and come together to help other people as right now. So I understand I got to do the medical thing. We need to keep on top of the research. We need to do what we can to optimize our immune system. Let's minimize the risk of further damage from COVID-19 later on, second wave. We need to figure out that one out. But I also know that I could overlook the beauty and humanity at this moment, or I could choose to acknowledge it and bring that to the forefront and help that grow and blossom. And that's really a thing I think, so we're in this crazy ass time, but there's good coming out of it. And I mean, the world is working, we're getting a little, it's funny. It's like I'm saying, everybody came together. Now we're getting a little antsy. We all want to get back outside, but we're all coming together to help other people, which is brilliant, so there is something that happens on the flip side of all of this that we can really choose what we want to focus on.
I've enjoyed this conversation greatly, Dr. Tom. I pulled back the screen here in the video so we can see all the art. You have some nice artwork behind you. Is that you or someone else that made the one over your shoulder?
No, that's my daughter Talia, and I think this is one of my favorite ones because it's nice and simple.
Love.
Yeah.
Maybe that's better than mistakes will happen. I can replace it later.
Yeah.
Or add one of it.
Well, I know the artist. I can hook you up.
Okay.
But yeah, she does all kinds of cool stuff for us, and I've got a bunch laying around that I just change them up in the background once in a while. So, but that's one of the things that she really loves to do is to express herself, and I'm just so proud of her. And so, thanks for giving me a moment to share them with everybody.
No, that's great. And I'd hope everyone that has been watching this live or sees the replay or listening to the audio podcast, if anything of this is useful to you, it's going to be also useful and valuable to others. So please share the podcast, share the video. And I really do thank you for joining me today, Dr. Tom. And I wish you a lovely rest of your day. And I look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Awesome. Same to you. Thanks for having me, Curt.